Hi, if you've been asked to teach a Sunday school class or an adult Bible fellowship or just a medium-sized group of adults on Sunday morning, I want to encourage you that you have been asked to do something that's incredibly important and valuable to the church, both locally and globally. This is where real life happens, and this is where people learn what the Bible means for their life. It's where they get to know other people. It's where they get into the life of the church. And with that said, I also feel for you because it's one of the most challenging environments that you can teach. Most teachers will admit that teaching a discussion of 5 or 10 people is pretty easy to do, but teaching a discussion for 25 people is very, very difficult. It's easy to lecture to 25 people, but not easy to lead a discussion. And so this environment where you're called upon to more or less lead a discussion type of teaching for 25 people is very, very challenging. But if you want to do it well, do what you're supposed to do well, you'll have to do a discussion. Whenever we teach, we always begin by asking what the purpose of our time together is. And for an adult Sunday school or for an adult Bible fellowship, you have 4 main purposes. They are fellowship, teaching, care, and outreach. And those 4 things need to influence the way that you prepare and the way that you deliver your teaching time. Before we get into those, I need to lay the groundwork once again. The most important thing you can do as you prep is to pray. God is the ultimate teacher. If he is not engaged, if he is not moving in your time together, then nothing's going to happen, and you've basically wasted all of your prep time. And so let me just urge you to spend a lot of time in prayer, asking God to lead you as you prepare and to lead your time as you teach. Okay, so one of the first major purposes of an adult Bible fellowship or an adult Sunday school is to promote fellowship itself. So as you're preparing to teach, you need to ask yourself, how can I promote fellowship? And the major way that you do it is by, instead of writing a lecture, you prepare to engage people into a discussion. The majority of people who come to your class will have already heard a sermon, or they're going to hear a sermon, so they don't need another one here. So what I do as a rule of thumb is when I'm preparing, I prepare for about 15 minutes of my own talking, and I prepare discussion questions for about an hour's worth of discussion. If you flip that and do the opposite and you prepare an hour of your own talking, you will get your hour in, but no one else will get to discuss anything. Ideally, about half of the time should be you talking, and about half the time should be them. And so an easy way for you to think about it is to imagine that everyone who comes into the room has 5 $1 bills. And anytime that they make a comment or ask a question, they're giving $1 into the pot. At the end of your discussion, every person should have less money in their hands. You should have $0 and everyone should have 3 or less. But if you've got 0 and everyone else is holding $5, you haven't done your job. Because one of our main purposes is fellowship, at the end of our time of discussion, we should know one another better and not just the content of the Bible or just the content of your teaching. The next major purpose that we have for getting together an adult Sunday school class or an adult Bible fellowship is teaching. And so my guideline for you here is be clear about the one main point that you want to make. You've studied, you've talked, you've thought through everything. Take us where you want to go. It doesn't mean, a dialogue doesn't mean a free-for-all. It's not like you're just saying anything goes. Find that one point and take us there. So as you're prepping, write out the one main point in a single sentence. That single sentence should be clear, simple, easy to understand. So as an example, this morning I was teaching on money, and my main point was contentment comes through relationship, not possessions. Simple, easy to remember. And so as you're leading your discussion, you will say that statement at the beginning. When the conversation goes off track, you'll say it again. When people are getting a little bit confused, you'll say it again. And you just keep the conversation moving in the right direction by having one main point that you're trying to get across. The next thing that I would encourage you to do is write out every question that you want to ask in a complete sentence. Use a full sentence. Don't just write thoughts or explain or what'd you think about that or something like that. Those don't help you at all when you get into the moment. So write out your clear sentences and focus your questions on the people that are in front of you. Some examples. What are some of the main ideas or thoughts or words that are in this passage? It's a simple, specific, open-ended question. When you hear the word predestination, what thoughts, what feelings come to mind? Simple, specific, and open-ended. Finally, when you're actually engaged in the discussion, be aware that people don't always know how to answer. They're going to give you short answers. They're going to give you things that are a little off base. And so the best way to keep the conversation flowing is to ask for follow-up. What do you mean by that? Describe what that word means to you. Explain what you're saying here. And if you do that, you'll get them to think through it. You'll get them actually to learn rather than just sitting there listening to you. The third main purpose of an adult Bible fellowship or an adult Sunday school class is that we would actually care for one another. Now, the best way for you to do this is to imagine the typical person who comes in to this class setting and where they've been that week or even that morning. Most of them just dropped off 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 kids, and they're pretty frazzled. They probably got into a couple of fights on the way over here. They are hectic and just kind of out of sorts. They plop themselves in here. They just want to see some other people. Now, if your main purpose is just to deliver content to them, well, then forget about who they are and where they've been. But if your purpose is to care for them, you need to think about that. And you need to create an environment where real life can come out, where honest questions can be asked, and really where your teaching time can be a place where we're actually caring for them in their current situation. So the first rule of thumb is be patient. You've had all week to think through the questions and the comments and the issues related to this passage. They've had 2 minutes, and they've hardly even been here for those first 2 minutes. And so be patient. If you ask a question, they don't get it right away, be patient. The second thing is listen. Listen, people don't want to be run over by a train. They want you to listen. They want you to care for them. And so if someone starts making a comment, listen to what they're saying, take it in, be patient, and then allow room. If someone else wants to comment on them, allow it. Most of the time, our problem is that we have too much content we're trying to get across. And so we get anxious, we get overeager to keep sharing more and more and more. And if the conversation veers in one direction, we get scared that we're not going to be able to get across all of our information. So if you come up with one point that you're trying to make, you leave a lot of room for people to share their life, to have questions, to have doubts, and to work together to care for one another as they try to understand the text of Scripture better. Finally, ask questions that focus attention on feelings, needs, emotions, and real life situations. Your research during the weeks leading up to teaching has answered the question of what does this passage mean? And you could tell us that briefly, quickly in your single big idea statement. Now, what we need to do is follow up from that into real life and tell me how it applies to me. So instead of asking a question like, now, how many disciples did Jesus have? You might say, now when Jesus picked his 12 disciples, he spent the entire night in prayer. Have you ever had any big situations? Any of you have any big situations going on right now? Are you devoting a lot of time to prayer for those? Well, why don't we talk about some of those life decisions you've got going on? So instead of asking a question, now how many disciples did Jesus have? That's a close-ended informational question. Focus on an emotion or focus on a real life situation, and set it up this way. Now, Jesus picked his 12 disciples, but before he did that, he spent the entire night in prayer. How many of you have major decisions going on? What major decisions are you thinking about? How are we going to pray through those? Or instead of saying, now how long was Noah on the ark for? Instead of asking a question like that, you might say, have you ever had a situation in life where God's solution took a lot longer than you were expecting? Are any of you in that situation right now? What doubts, what fears, what emotions came up as you waited for God to come through? If someone happens to express an emotion, if they start to cry, or things just kind of get a little bit more difficult than you were expecting, allow that to happen, and feel free to break from your teaching path to stop and pray, to care for someone, to even maybe have someone hug someone in there. If you come up with one point and that's all you're trying to do, then you have a lot of freedom and a lot of flexibility to allow the Holy Spirit to begin speaking and communicating care to the people who are in there. So the fourth major purpose of an adult Bible fellowship or adult Sunday school class is outreach. It's our job to bring people who don't know Christ in and love them and to the point where they can choose Christ for themselves. And so what we need to do is we need to be teaching in such a way that we will benefit first-timers and old-timers. So lead a discussion that will appeal to people who don't know anything and people who've been in the faith for a long time. And just to give you a little heads up, I have literally been asked, who is David? Who is Moses? Who is Jesus? People in our world don't know anything. They don't know what Matthew is, what Romans is, what the Old Testament is. We need to teach in such a way that those people can be engaged with us and understand what's going on. So when I teach, I assume that half the audience doesn't know anything. That makes me teach slower, makes me teach more intentionally, it makes me teach more clearly, and I explain a lot more things. If you teach in such a way that only old-time believers will benefit, pretty soon you'll only be talking to old-time believers, and pretty soon you'll be talking to no one at all, because people who don't get it will just leave. It doesn't benefit them, and they're out of here. And so what we need to do is we need to lead a discussion and ask questions that speak directly to people at all stages of spiritual maturity, from a complete non-Christian person to your oldest believer. And I always ask questions that intentionally speak to non-Christians. Even if I don't think that there are any non-Christians in the class, I would still do that, because I want the people who are sitting there to think, you know what, I've got a non-Christian friend who has that same question. Maybe I should invite them next time. And if I do that enough, pretty soon we'll create an environment where non-Christians are invited in and they're getting their questions asked and they're coming to know Christ. So to summarize, what we do is we're preparing and teaching adult Sunday school classes and adult Bible fellowships. We pray often. We clarify the one point that we want to make, and we repeat it consistently. We ask good questions and we ask follow-up questions because we want to lead a discussion. And then finally, we leave room for people to be cared for. We leave space for people to have their real questions, their honest doubts and reservations out in the open. And we teach in such a way that a non-believer and an old-time believer can both benefit.